Hello, and welcome to Investment Insight, your clear take on the markets. Let's get started. Today, we are undertaking a truly essential deep dive. If you're an investor or really just someone trying to make sense of the dizzying headlines about trade wars and shifting alliances, this discussion is mission critical.
It really is.
We're not analyzing a market blip here or, some temporary trade spat. We are looking at recent trends that signal a fundamental, almost tectonic shift in global power.
Yeah, decades in the making.
Exactly. The entire structure of who buys what, who consumes, and who sets the rules, it's all changing. And the center of gravity seems to be moving distinctly away from that decades-long reliance on U.S. dominance. So our mission today is to cut through all that noise, understand the mechanics of this transition, and really identify where the real, durable growth opportunities are emerging on this. Well, this dramatically reconfigured global chessboard.
That framing is perfect because the data is it's
Yeah.
unequivocal. We are past the tipping point.
Past the tipping point.
Yes. What we've done is synthesize the recent analysis into two core interconnected themes. And these are really the twin pillars of this global realignment that I think every financially literate person needs to grasp immediately.
Okay.
Because they really dictate future capital flows. First, we have what we're calling the Asia buys Asia phenomenon.
Asia buys Asia.
Right. And this is so much more than a simple shift in exports. It represents a massive structural reversal in global trade routes, where Asian internal demand, the demand within Asia, now functions as the primary self-sustaining engine of the global economy, often, entirely bypassing the West.
Wow. Okay. And the second pillar.
The second is the rapid, and I think frequently underestimated, ascent of China's soft power. China is rapidly shifting its global perception from being merely the world's manufacturer.
The world's factory.
The world's factory, exactly. To becoming a formidable technological, cultural, and geopolitical leader. And this is especially true across the crucial nations of what we call the Global South.
When you lay it out like that, it sounds incredibly complex, especially if you're just trying to figure out where the safe bets are, where the growth is.
Of course.
But you shouldn't feel overwhelmed. We are going to break down the hard data, the mechanics underneath it all, and the investment strategies into easily digestible real-world concepts. We're going to give you that clear, actionable view on what is changing, why the U.S. political uncertainty is accelerating these changes, and most importantly, why it matters to your portfolio right now. Okay, let's unpack this monumental economic realignment. For, 40 years? The core economic formula that structured global trade was simple.
Very simple.
China manufactures everything at massive scale, low cost, and the U.S. consumes it voraciously. That trans-Pacific trade route was the backbone of globalization, but according to the analysis we're looking at, that formula is officially permanently broken.
It truly is. This is that structural reversal that economists have been tracking, and it was just perfectly confirmed by the China General Administration of Customs data published in mid-November.
So this is fresh data.
It's very fresh. And the headline statistic really confirms the trend. If you look at the first 10 months of 2025, China's total exports to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN,
Right.
it exceeded its exports to the U.S. by a staggering margin, over 20%.
Wait, let's just pause on that number for a second. 20% more exported to ASEAN than to the historically indispensable American consumer market.
That's the number.
That is not just a statistical fluctuation you contribute to the trade war. That means Southeast Asia is now consuming a fifth more of China's output than the entire United States. How definitive is this shift? Is this a one-time surge, or is this, like you said, the new normal?
This is absolutely the new normal, and that gap is only expected to widen. This data completely upends the old model, where the U.S. consumer was the indispensable final customer for everything.
Right.
The implication is that Southeast Asia has rapidly emerged as the single largest and most crucial customer for Chinese goods. To use an analogy, imagine Coca-Cola suddenly realizing its primary source of profit growth isn't coming from North America anymore.
Its home base.
Exactly. But instead, it's coming entirely from this explosion of localized demand and distribution centers spread across a new, highly integrated regional bloc. That is the empirical confirmation of this Asia buys Asia concept. It's a deeply structural, long-term move.
So if the U.S. consumer is no longer the gravitational center, how exactly is Asia managing to become its own massive, self-sustaining economic engine? It sounds like they are creating an internal market that rivals their former dependence on the entire Western world. What are the key drivers behind this?
Well, the immediate quantifiable driver, the catalyst that really accelerated this trend, is the implementation of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP.
RCEP, that's that monumental free trade agreement, right? The one that links like 15 nations in the Asia Pacific.
That's the one.
Mhm.
China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the whole 10-nation ASEAN bloc. But here is the nuance that many people outside the trade world miss. The key isn't just that RCEP eliminated tariffs on finished goods, like appliances or cars.
Okay.
The truly structural factor is the elimination of tariffs and regulatory barriers on intermediate goods.
Can you elaborate on that distinction for us? I mean, what exactly are intermediate goods, and why is getting rid of tariffs on them so much more impactful than on, say, an iPhone?
Absolutely. Think of intermediate goods as the components, the parts, the half-finished products. If you're building a car, the finished car is the final good.
Right.
But the engine block, the tires, the wiring harness, that touchscreen display, those are all intermediate goods. Historically, if those components cross multiple Asian borders for various stages of processing, say Japanese components going to China, then to Vietnam, they were taxed every single time.
Which made it expensive and complicated.
Incredibly. Now, with RCEP eliminating the cost of moving these components between, say, China and Vietnam or Korea and Malaysia, the trade in these goods has just exploded. It's increased explosively.
So that surge proves that Asia is basically consolidating into one giant, seamless, a single factory?
A single factory and a single market.
Yeah.
It's operating almost entirely within the region's borders, feeding its finished products into a huge market of 2.2 billion people. Its efficiency optimized for itself.
That structural shift is profound. And here's where it gets really interesting, because this is where that popular but often misleading narrative of decoupling from China completely breaks down. We hear U.S. politicians say companies have to leave China, but the data shows China isn't just exporting physical goods anymore. It's exporting capital and production capacity. This is what analysts are calling the era of factory export.
That phrase perfectly encapsulates the strategic maneuver. The analysis shows that China is manufacturing in the world, not just for the world. In practical terms, this means Chinese companies are rapidly establishing local factories, setting up massive operations, and starting localized production deep inside ASEAN nations.
But wait, if they're moving production from Shenzhen to, say, Bangkok, aren't they just moving the political target? How does this truly de-risk the system if the capital and control are still Chinese?
That's a critical question. And the answer reveals this dual strategy they're playing. First, it's tactical, to skirt U.S. sanctions or tariffs. By assembling a product in Thailand, that product might legally gain a new country of origin status.
And avoid the tariffs.
And potentially avoid those punitive U.S. duties. But the second, and I'd argue more strategically significant purpose, is long-term, to capture that rapidly growing Asian domestic demand. This is the heart of the Asia buys Asia model.
So they're not just dodging tariffs, they're embedding themselves in a new growth market.
Exactly. The goal is to capture market share in ASEAN, not just find a loophole.
And we see this playing out with massive examples. BYD, the EV titan, is pouring billions into new plants in Thailand and Indonesia. Xiaomi is setting up in Vietnam. Alibaba is building huge logistics hubs all over the region.
These are not temporary moves. It's a systematic cross-sector effort to embed Chinese capital and technology deep into the entire region.
Which brings us to this idea of supply chain internalization.
Correct. Because the parts trade is tariff-free and the capital is embedded locally, the entire production-to-consumption cycle is now contained within Asia. Let's just trace the journey of a complex product today.
Okay.
Raw materials, maybe nickel or iron ore, might come from Australia or Indonesia. These go to Korea, Japan, or China for refinement into complex components.
Intermediate goods.
Exactly. They are then shipped tariff-free, thanks to RCEP, to massive new assembly facilities in Vietnam or Thailand. Finally, that finished product is consumed locally in Indonesia, the Philippines, or back in China itself. The entire flow is completed, financed, and consumed almost entirely within the boundaries of the RCEP nations.
So this new economic structure suggests a significant resilience against external shocks. The data seems to suggest that even if the Trump administration follows through on aggressive tariff threats, like a blanket tariff on all Chinese imports, the Asian economy is now far more resilient to that shock.
That's the key takeaway. This internalized supply chain and massive domestic consumption base acts as an economic breakwater.
A breakwater. I like that.
We saw a detailed report from HSBC that emphasized this point forcefully. They concluded that the exponential growth in intra-Asian trade is powerful enough to offset the expected GDP losses from increased U.S. protectionism.
They actually quantified that.
They did. The analysis suggests the intra-Asian trade growth is predicted to have a net positive impact, estimating a GDP uplift of about plus 1.8%.
That's a huge buffer.
It's a huge buffer. It means that old saying, if the U.S. sneezes, Asia catches a cold, is obsolete. Asia can now absorb a U.S. protectionist shock without falling into recession because its internal market is simply too big and too integrated.
This data, it just directly necessitates a radical shift in how we approach global investment. The strategies that worked when that trans-Pacific route dominated are now inherently risky.
They're exposed.
So let's transition into our key investment insights from this. Investment insight number 1, de-risking via Asian domestic demand. The core takeaway here seems simple. You have to reorient your portfolio center of gravity.
That's right.
You need to reduce exposure to companies that are solely reliant on U.S. consumption and aggressively seek out firms generating robust revenue from the surging Asian domestic market.
To get specific, this means identifying sectors that are naturally hedged against U.S. tariff risk. Look at consumer staples with high market share in ASEAN. Think food and beverage companies, regional telcos, local pharmaceutical firms.
Because they're selling to Malaysians or Indonesians, not Americans.
Exactly. They're insulated from tariffs imposed by Washington. Also, think about the infrastructure required for all this. Focus on Asian logistics and shipping companies benefiting from that increased cargo flow, or the construction and machinery firms building the ports, rail lines, and power grids connecting this new single market.
Right. They're building the plumbing of the Asia buys Asia engine itself. And as we discussed, where the goods flow, the money must follow. That leads us to investment insight number 2. Money follows goods. The logistics of moving hundreds of billions of dollars of parts, managing financing for massive projects, handling payments, it requires an explosive increase in financial services.
Exactly. Trade finance, complex currency exchange, remittance services. The institutions that act as the financial infrastructure for this trade are critical beneficiaries.
So we're talking about the big global banks with strong Asian networks?
Yes. Think HSBC or Standard Chartered. They are perfectly positioned to profit by collecting the toll on these colossal fund flows. But you also have to look beyond the global giants. The leading regional powerhouses like DBS in Singapore or CIMB in Malaysia are equally important.
They're the local experts.
They're the ones on the ground, handling the daily transactional volume for the millions of businesses now trading almost entirely within the RCEP network. Their growth is structurally locked into this phenomenon.
Okay, we need to spend a little more time on this, challenging that prevailing media narrative. Investment insight number 3 addresses the misleading concept of decoupling. Everyone talks about China +1, suggesting companies are fleeing China. But your analysis shows it's better understood as China expansion.
The term decoupling is just overly simplistic and, frankly, politically charged. What we are witnessing is an outsourcing of lower-end assembly, while the high-value stuff research, design, and capital deployment remains centralized in China.
So the opportunity isn't just in the countries receiving the factories.
No. The opportunity is also with the companies that are cooperating with or supplying the high-end equipment to those new Chinese subsidiaries abroad.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? If BYD sets up a new advanced manufacturing plant in Thailand, who is supplying the robotics, the specialized machinery, the power systems?
Precisely. That need creates a massive opportunity for companies in neighboring technologically advanced nations. We're specifically talking about Korean and Japanese companies that provide high-end industrial automation, sophisticated testing equipment, reliable power grid infrastructure. They are critical suppliers to these Chinese giants as they expand.
So it's more of a symbiotic relationship, not a divorce.
It's an industrial necessity.
And before we move on to soft power, let's tie this internal consumption theme back to culture, which leads to a 4th insight here: the rise of local Asian consumer brands.
Absolutely. Asia is not just B2B, it's cultural. Historically, Western brands dominated, from luxury goods to fast food. Now we are seeing a dramatic shift toward a cultural preference for regional excellence.
Right, like the explosion of K-beauty and K-food products.
Exactly. And J-culture influences and the massive rapid ascendancy of C-commerce platforms like Temu and Ali, which are gaining market share incredibly fast, they just inherently understand the local supply chain and consumer tastes better.
So investors should be looking for those top local consumer goods companies that can cater to and capture Asian tastes better than the legacy Western brands.
It's a self-reinforcing trend. As Asian brands gain cultural cachet, they become markers of regional identity.
That wraps up a very detailed look at this massive economic realignment. The takeaway is clear. The gravitational center of global trade has moved. But economic power is only half the equation. Now, we have to turn to that less tangible but equally powerful factor, China's growing global influence through its soft power.
If part one was about the hardware of trade, the ports, the components, part two is about the software of influence. We have to look beyond raw economic data to understand China's evolving global influence, its soft power,
It's about perception, diplomacy, technological penetration.
and cultural resonance.
Right.
And it is accelerating rapidly, especially in the vacuum left by U.S. isolationism.
The stage where this shift was most visibly confirmed was the 2025 G20 summit in Rio. That was a critical political moment. With President Trump focused so heavily on domestic policy, often absent or isolated by his America First agenda, President Xi Jinping effectively stepped into a leadership vacuum and took center stage.
That vacuum was pivotal. Xi strategically positioned himself not just as the leader of China, but explicitly as the representative and advocate for the entire global South, the developing world.
Right.
He didn't just attend. He explicitly promised to expand China's global development initiative to aid developing nations, cementing China's image as a reliable, non-judgmental partner willing to finance and build critical infrastructure.
This sounds like standard diplomacy, but why is it so effective right now? Why is the global South so receptive to China's model over the traditional path offered by the West?
It's highly effective because China offers a compelling alternative to what's often called the Washington Consensus. That's the traditional Western economic prescription for the IMF and World Bank. Things like trade liberalization, deregulation, privatization, austerity.
And those often come with strings attached.
Exactly. Political conditions, austerity requirements, a perceived infringement on sovereignty. China, however, offers massive debt-financed infrastructure projects, ports, roads, power plants with minimal political conditionality. They offer a development model based on state-led investment, which just resonates powerfully with leaders eager for rapid, visible modernization without Western interference.
And this influence isn't just theoretical. We're seeing it concretized right in what was historically considered the U.S. backyard.
That's right. Just before the G20, President Xi attended the opening ceremony of the massive deepwater Chanchay port in Peru.
A port majority owned and funded by China.
Right. And it's designed to drastically cut shipping times from South America to Asia, bypassing traditional hubs. At the same time, China strengthened agricultural and mineral cooperation with Brazil. These aren't minor transactions.
No, these are strategic, multi-billion-dollar actions.
And the global perception is shifting dramatically. China is no longer just a trading partner that buys raw materials. It is now seen increasingly as a leader providing infrastructure and a viable development model.
Okay, now let's pivot to culture. Recent analysis suggests that for younger generations across the world, China is actually transforming into a cool country driven by what analysts are calling the C wave.
The C wave. It's driven by platform dominance and genuine technological innovation. Chinese technological and cultural platforms are integrating themselves into global daily life in a way that is just utterly disruptive.
I mean, we have to mention TikTok, which is obviously the dominant force in global content and cultural trends, but what else is driving this sea wave?
Look at commerce. You have Temu and Shein dominating global shopping for hyper-optimized fast fashion and incredibly low-cost goods. You have BYD rapidly becoming the global brand for cost-effective, high-quality EVs, fundamentally challenging Tesla.
Right.
And crucially, you have cultural exports. Massive, globally successful gaming hits like Genshin Impact or the highly anticipated Black Myth, Wukong. They're capturing the global imagination.
This signals a huge generational shift in perception. Chinese products are now seen not as low-cost imitations, but as cost-effective advanced technology. The soft power gained when a teenager in Nairobi or a student in London is spending hours on a Chinese app driving a Chinese EV, it's incalculable.
And this cultural ascent is buttressed by a crucial geopolitical positioning, projecting China as the reliable partner, especially when you contrast it with the perceived volatility of the current U.S. administration.
That contrast is key, isn't it? In an era of sudden tariff announcements from Washington, China is successfully positioning itself as the stable, predictable, and reasonable counterparty.
It's a masterful diplomatic move. At the APEC meetings in late October, they showed flexibility. They delayed some threatened rare earth material controls that could have crippled global manufacturing.
A deliberate move to look like the rational actor in the room.
Exactly. It reframed China as a rational partner, prioritizing transactions over confrontation. And that stability message resonates powerfully with European and Asian nations who are frustrated by the instability of the America First approach.
Mm.
Predictability is an overwhelming advantage in global commerce right now.
Okay, this geopolitical and cultural shift creates a whole new set of risks and opportunities.
It does.
So, investment insight number one, partnering with China in the global south. If your goal is to capitalize on growth in developing nations, Egypt, Indonesia, Brazil, the best entry point is often through companies partnered with or led by Chinese capital.
The logic is simple. China is the primary financier and builder in these regions. The areas of greatest capital expenditure and guaranteed growth major infrastructure, energy, mineral extraction, are predominantly led by or dependent upon Chinese firms and Chinese state capital.
So investors should be looking at Chinese construction, heavy equipment, and energy firms.
Including those listed in Hong Kong. Or you look at multinational corporations that strategically form consortiums with them to gain access to these massive state-backed projects. They're the gatekeepers.
Okay, investment insight number two focuses on the youth-driven nature of the sea wave. Structural growth in sea commerce and content. This trend is capturing the next generation of global consumers. Platforms like TikTok, Temu, and BYD aren't just exporting products, they're driving global consumer culture. Now, we have to acknowledge the regulatory risks from U.S.-China tensions.
Of course, especially with data security.
But their consumer lock-in is currently too strong to ignore.
It is. And look at Chinese content companies, particularly in gaming. They are often undervalued when you consider their immense, proven global reach. Genshin Impact is a perfect case study. A high-quality Chinese game competing successfully with the top Japanese and Western studios.
That ability to deliver high-quality, cost-effective content on a global scale suggests strong growth potential.
It does. And this leads us directly to a longer-term strategic concern. Investment insight number three. Hedging U.S. brand erosion. This isn't just about tariffs, it's about soft power failure.
What do you mean by that?
Declining global approval of U.S. leadership could lead to the long-term slow weakening of the globally recognized U.S. brand premium, maybe even the dollar's dominance over decades. If the world sees the U.S. as volatile or unreliable, the cachet of a U.S. brand might diminish.
So if the U.S. brand is losing its global luster, what's the proactive move for an investor?
It means reviewing your holdings in traditional U.S. consumer goods forms, especially those relying on the cachet of Made in America to justify a price premium. Consumers in the Global South might increasingly choose a local champion or an Asian competitor over a traditional U.S. legacy brand.
So diversify.
Geographical and brand diversification. Rotate capital into successful local champions in these emerging markets, or into global brands that have proven they can thrive in the hyper-competitive Chinese market. You have to assume global consumers will no longer automatically open their wallets just because of a U.S. label.
Our final insight addresses the nations that are masters of this complex diplomacy. Investment insight number four, the value of swing states. These are the nations that benefit by playing the middle ground between the U.S. and China.
They are the high-wire acrobats of this new multipolar world. Their strategy is simple. Seek massive Chinese investment for infrastructure and technology while simultaneously retaining vital U.S. security and defense ties.
They extract the best from both superpowers.
Exactly. Indonesia is a perfect example. They attract massive Chinese EV investment and sell them nickel for batteries, while also strengthening security engagement with the U.S. military. Saudi Arabia is another. Balancing oil diplomacy with strong Chinese infrastructure contracts, while their national security remains aligned with the U.S.
And Brazil.
They leverage agricultural output for Chinese trade deals, while remaining active in U.S.-led institutions. These swing states, often represented by their sovereign wealth funds or major national companies, are incredibly attractive investment targets.
Because they benefit from the competitive courtship of the two superpowers.
They capture the best of both worlds, Chinese capital and U.S. stability. Their assets are structurally less exposed to the specific risks of either Washington or Beijing because they maintain that optionality.
These insights collectively paint a picture of a world that is. It's just structurally and culturally reordered. The old maps, drawn when the U.S. consumer was king, are dangerously outdated. Hashtag tag conclusion.
To synthesize the core message of this deep dive, the World Trade Center has decisively moved from being focused on trans-Pacific commerce to intra-Asian commerce. Asia, driven by RCEP and massive capital flows, has successfully built the capacity to consume and grow independently.
Right.
That structural buffer is now in place. We must definitively declare the old saying, if the U.S. sneezes, Asia catches a cold, obsolete. The Asian economic breakwater is strong enough to absorb the shock of U.S. protectionism.
So the crucial message for investors is this. You have to abandon the outdated view of China purely as a production risk that's tied only to U.S. consumer demand. Instead, you need to actively seek out and capitalize on the areas of Chinese expansion, the Global South, content platforms, e-commerce, next-gen industries, to find new, robust growth engines that naturally hedge against specific U.S. risks.
What stands out here, above all else, is the absolute necessity of rigorous geographic portfolio diversification. In a world where U.S. hegemony is no longer the absolute guarantor of stability, relying exclusively on a single major consumer market is now the greater risk.
It's less hedged.
Far less. The old world rewarded centralization of capital in traditional Western markets. The new world rewards diversity, resilience, and adaptability. So the core question for you, the listener, is, how quickly can you fully reorient your perspective to acknowledge this new world map and restructure your portfolio to benefit from these parallel self-sustaining global engines?
That is a powerful and necessary challenge to end on. Thank you for joining us for this extensive deep dive into the massive shifts underway in global trade and soft power. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button.